There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We will control the horizontal.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass.
We will control the vertical.
And I'm all out of bubblegum.
Mr. Pop.
Michael J. Fox.
Yeah. Okay, that seems to be. All right. The kitchen sink is running.
Here we are, and we find ourselves in a post-Steinman world.
What's really strange for me about all of this is that a week before he passed, I got a phone call from one of the people in the camp and telling me that he was really, he was really not not well at all. And I was like, well, I had heard about all of that. He goes, no, it's far worse, far, far worse. And then what's weird is getting a message from someone who works at Variety telling me of the passing. And I was like, oh my God, he passed. I can't believe it. And so I texted this, the person offering condolences in the camp. And he's like, what are you talking about? And so he hadn't even known. So Variety magazine knew before this other person in the camp was made aware of it. So beyond bizarre.
I had heard that he was in decline since February.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things, he'd been incredibly ill since 2018. And the last time I spoke to him, 2018, suffered an enormous stroke. And you're never really, it's coming, but you're never really prepared for it when it comes.
No one is. No one is.
I think, like most people, I have a strange relationship with death and the way that it just creeps up on you indiscriminate and affects your life in some way. You sit there and you start thinking about that person that you'll never hear talk again, and you'll never be able to hear their voice or ask them a question or just hang out with them like you used to.
It's a final moment. That's it. It's gone. It's a chapter is closed in your life.
The great thing about Jim Steinman is, though, ultimately, he is gone, but all of his work lives on.
Absolutely.
And it lives on within many people in many different mediums. When you think of all of the lives that those songs have touched and those lyrics have helped mold.
Absolutely. And what about the people now? What about these people that weren't aware just how much, just how big a body of work that he brought to the music world? Most people didn't realize that he was the person that created all of these songs, and for so many different artists. I mean, how many number ones, or how many at least in the top 10?
18.
Isn't that crazy?
18 number one hits.
Yeah, 18. That's a huge,
insane number.
Yeah. Incredible.
When you look at most bands throughout the course of their lifetimes, they don't achieve anything close to 18 number one hits.
No, absolutely not.
So it's a remarkable number, and it's a testament to the quality of those songs and the strength of Jim's songwriting.
Absolutely. Who would have guessed that this was going to be our first, we kept putting together all our ideas about the Kitchen Sink Chronicles. And the irony that this is the first podcast that we decided to put out. His music brought us together, brought people together, but in a bizarre way brought our relationship and our friendship together. How, when you kind of zoom out and see how did that all come together? I mean, my life was definitely affected by the music that he wrote. I wouldn't have taken this life path had it not been for his music. And the music was incredible. I enjoyed very much performing those songs. There were mini operas. I grew up in an Italian household listening to Italian opera and all these great Neapolitan singers. So there was a familiarity and a connection to this type of music.
Yeah, it was the same for me, so it's comforting to hear you say that. The idea that Jim's songs were mini movies, mini narratives.
Yeah.
in themselves. That was the first thing that turned me on to his music, the idea of storytelling within song, which was something I'd touched on as a kid growing up in the 80s, but had never really realised to the fullest extent until that album came out in 1993, and I was it hit me just at the right point in my life when I was in my early teens, and Bat 2 came out. And just as an example, you have Objects in the Rearview Mirror, which is, as you know very well, a song about this guy, road weary, travelling down the highway, looking back at his own past and the ghosts of the people he's known and the places that he's been, that he can revisit physically but can never truly revisit mentally. That always resonated with me. Go on.
No, I was going to say, did you, because obviously you had a much more intimate conversations with him than I have ever had. Although I've had quite a few, but not nearly as many as you have. Did you ever touch on these songs? Did you guys ever, was that something that came up with his inspiration for writing?
Very occasionally, because we were so, Jim's time was so slim because of all of his other commitments with getting the musical off the ground, and also the medical issues that we were both having at the time, though they were different in some ways that crossed over. So time was always short, so we always made the most of it with regards to the work. But there were times when we would talk about, off the top of my head, we talked about Good Girls Go to Heaven, Bad Girls Go Everywhere.
What did he have to say? How did that come up, if you don't mind me prying?
I don't. It came up via... I was trying to explain to Jim from an outsider's perspective, from the perspective of a kid or a teenager, what the impact of those songs and what they meant, especially, and I know we both share this in common, you come from a certain kind of background and you've had a certain kind of domestic home life, shall we say. It's then interesting to hear the reflections of that in those songs, but then this almost atavistic sense of you can be more than this. You can do what you want to do with your life. You're not beholden to a set of ideals instilled within you by the location you were born in or the circumstances you were born into.
That's the glass half full.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which, excuse me, no one should ever lose that childlike quality, that anything is possible, and to continue that in your adult years. Interesting, but it's also interesting to hear the bits of, well, with songwriting, for myself, it always comes from a place, from a personal place, and whether, you can take the spin, making it humorous, sarcastic, and all of that, but you reveal a bit of yourself, and that's what you do with the songs.
Now that's an interesting thread you just hit on. There's been a lot of conversation over the past 10 or 15 years, especially in the music press, surrounding Jim's material, and the idea that his songs are absurd, and knowingly so, that they're knowingly absurd, that has kind of been propagated by the whole post-ironic hipster movement of the mid-2000s. And I remember talking to Jim about this and saying, you know what, I could hear the humour in those songs growing up, but for me, the humour was based on the situations, and I took the songs incredibly seriously, and I took those messages seriously and those stories. And again, that was the great thing about those songs and Jim's amazing, overwhelming talent, that he could inject full narratives with characters and situations that everyone could relate to within those songs and turn them into stories. And for me personally, those songs always manifested in my mind as if I were reading a novel. The characters and the situations would be as in-depth visually in my mind as they would be if I were reading a novel. And that changed music for me forever.
Interesting.
And even though this is probably a good time to put this little disclaimer in here, but even though people are going to listen to us talking about these things, and they're going to hear all kinds of things, and not just from us, you can hear it from other past collaborators and people who have worked with Jim in the past. But no matter how complex our relationships became, and no matter what happened between us, it can never take away for anyone listening what those songs mean and what they meant and the impact they had on people's lives.
Yeah. It makes you wonder how how the universe brought the two of you together. There are no coincidences in life. It's like, was there a lesson to be learned? Was there something?
It was a strange thing. We would comment on that ourselves sometimes. The idea that we'd found each other at turning points, both of us. I was incredibly ill and kind of at my wit's end. And Jim was also pretty ill, albeit not as ill as he eventually became, and in a terrible place with the musical. And I guess it was that relationship, that meeting at the time, that furthered those situations on both of our behalves. Jim posted something online, either a blog or something, I can't remember now. Something resonated within me and reminded me of those times back in the 90s, the early 90s, and so I sent him a letter. He replied to the letter and had Googled me online. He'd looked me up on the internet and found writing samples on my website, and we got talking, and then it just became obvious that we had an awful lot in common. And that's how that whole thing started. And I remember Jim asking me...
I remember everything. Sorry, I had to go there.
You had
Forgive me.
You had to go there.
I had to.
You
set it up, and I just... Phew.
Yep.
Sorry.
That's right.
Sorry about that. Okay.
I set up the dominoes,
made you
and she knocks them down.
Yeah, I know. And then I hope I didn't make you lose your train of thought.
Don't worry about it. Tell me about your standout memories of Jim. Things people might not know.
Let's see. Okay, first one early on was the song "The Future Ain't What It Used to Be." So I wanted to record the song, and I sat down with
Amazing
Mark Alexander.
song.
Yeah, I sat down with Mark Alexander, and I said, I want to record this. We ended up recording it in his house, just piano, vocal live, no fancy setup or anything.
Oh, wait a minute! Wasn't that you did that in one take in an apartment in New York City?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, there was no in Mark's house. Yeah, in Mark's apartment.
See, I do listen to the things you tell me.
Yeah, and okay.
Every once in a while.
So but I did an edit. I had come up with an edited version of the song. So I had recorded it and I sent it off. I don't think Jim was online then, but I sent it off to Steve Rinkoff, that version. And I got a response back, a reply, they loved it and whatever. And then time just went on. Till one day I got a phone call from Don Kettler, because apparently they were going to be using the song as a soundtrack, or using that version. And Don Kettler himself phoned me up to ask me how would I like to be listed in the arrangement credits. And I was like, what? Arrangement credits? And it was just like, it really was like, whoa. Yeah, he's like, is it Patricia Russo? Is it Patti Russo? Is it... And I was really blown away. I mean, I understand that never came to pass. I think this was for Wuthering Heights. But I was blown away. I was like, wow. And that's a big leap, because nobody, as a songwriter, nobody likes anybody playing with their dicing and slicing and all of that. So I was really honored that my choice of editing for his song not only was appreciated, but that he was actually going to be giving me an arrangement credit, which at the time was a huge, for me, wow. To have that opportunity, or just to even have that acknowledgement coming from him, was pretty amazing. So that was a cool moment.
I can imagine.
Yeah, it was very cool.
Yeah, sharing a songwriting credit. I like that. Me and Jim had a strange and strained relationship with credits. But we'll save that for another time.
Let's see, I'm thinking now. Here's another one that most people may or may not know. I'm not sure what came first, the chicken or the egg, or who phoned me first about this, but Dance of the Vampires. I was approached to audition for that. And so I went into the city, and Jim was sitting there with several other people. I sang. There was a pianist there. I brought sheet music to It's All Coming Back to Me Now, and I performed the song for the panel in the room, very small room. And I was given a call back. They wanted to see how I moved, and I was like, technically not a dancer and all of that. But they're like, no. We just, Jim's just like, just go to this audition. So here I go. I walk into this, and apparently it's all too apparent when I walk in. This was a rehearsal space, a rehearsal building for dancers. And I walk in completely not dressed for the part. Again, one of these moments. I walk in, who's got their leg on the bar, who's plie, everybody kind of knows each other, and I just walk in as the new kid in town, very awkward, and I felt very self-conscious. And they started gathering people. I signed in, of course, or whatever, and told them who I was and all of that. And they started putting people together to create certain parts for this, for Dance of the Vampires. And it was, for me, I was like, oh my God, I am so out of my element right now. I got up, I walked over to the table, I said, I'm sorry, this is a foreign world for me. I know nothing. I can keep rhythm and all of that, but this is, I think there's a huge mistake in me being here. And they were like, no, not to worry. They said, well, you can just watch a few of these and you'll catch on. It's very simple. And, it wasn't very simple, because even the dance dialogue with words or terms, I had a kickball chain, and it was all like speaking another language to me.
It's kind of like turning up for an audition as a guitarist and then being told, didn't you know you're expected to play the harmonica at the same time too?
Yeah, on one foot. Yeah, I'm hopping around on one foot, counterclockwise. Yeah. It really was crazy. And I'm trying to remember, because I think I called him. I know I went out for like a cigarette break, which is very cool because I ended up meeting Liza Minnelli. Here we go.
Not again.
Liza Minnelli.
I heard again. Gene calling me in the background.
Gene Waldo.
That old son of a gun, huh?
Gene Waldo. Liza Minnelli. I met her and had a really cool chat with her in the elevator. And I think I called Jim. And I said, I feel like I'm in an I Love Lucy episode right now. The wine episode where she's got to be stomping grapes in Italy. And he's like, I'm sure it's not that bad. I go, no, it is. It is that bad. And I feel foolish being here. And I went back in, and to add insult to injury, not that, first off, I don't know any of these dance moves. I don't know what they're talking about. I don't know the history of the show. But there was a dance sequence that they were preparing to do. And one of the instructors was like, okay, I'm going to show you. And, and I felt like I was being, like all eyes were on me. And it was some sort of ballroom dancing scene. And he had me moving, and I'm following him. Okay, fine. He's like, okay, now you're going to be doing this with no one there. And it was put in really, the whole thing for me was so awkward. I did the best I could, but I felt foolish, and I stuck it through. But at the finale of this rehearsal, audition, or what have you, they called out, okay, we're going to be doing blah, 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 and all this dialogue, all this dance dialogue. And I kid you not, Nick, this dance sequence looked like something out of Michael Jackson's Thriller.
So just the basic stuff then?
It was so intricate. It was, and totally then I went into full I Love Lucy mode. I was Lucy on this thing. Could not. I probably twisted my legs around each other. I'm just trying to follow. And of course, I stayed in the back. And I did. I felt like an ass. But I went through it.
You're talking to someone who has no sense of rhythm at all whatsoever, which is why I never became a musician, so trust me when I say I sympathise with you in full.
I was so out of my element. I really was. I felt that there was no confidence whatsoever. But nonetheless, after saying all of that, there was the part of that was offered was the understudy for the character named Magda. And I think she was a bartender or something. I believe I accepted it. And then I spoke with who I was working for at the time. And I ended up then having to pass on the project. And I know that Jim was very disappointed. And I felt funny about all of that. But looking back now, I guess the whole musical everything went pear-shaped or tits up. I guess after a certain character came in, a certain actor, and if I'm not mistaken, Jim never even went to the opening night of the musical.
So I've heard.
Yeah.
I think you dodged a bullet with that one.
But I wasn't that. Again, like I said, my confidence for all of that, I didn't connect musically. I could sing, but the dancing and all, I mean, really, it was a candid camera moment for me. I was like, oh, people are watching me. Oh, I'm so, wait, is there a camera? Please, God. But yeah, there's another one of my crazy stories.
Yeah, I never saw you as the ballet type.
No, I'm not Grace at all. I wish I was. I wish I had studied it. I wanted to study ballet.
You've never seen this film. It's a John Hughes film from the 80s, Weird Science, with Anthony Michael Hall, and funnily enough, that was Robert Downey Jr.'s first film as well. I think he has a bit role. But the main character is played by Kelly LeBrock, and there are certain scenes within that film, and this was a kind of childhood, coming-of-age, teenage film for me that I still watch to this day. That character in certain scenes reminds me of you, and that's about as incredibly cool character. She owns the film, but it's about as far away from ballet as you can imagine. And that kind of musical theatre dancing, I know it's not ballet, but I'm a non-dancer, so you'll have to deal with that terminology.
It was, I can't follow. I mean, I can remember going to aerobics classes in my 20s, early 20s, with friends, and just the mirror, just following someone in the opposite way was throwing me it just couldn't do it. Whether or not it was a mental block that I said that I couldn't do it, and physically I couldn't do it.
Is it weird that the first thing that pops into my head is the Cher aerobic video? The one that ended up in every single charity shop after the 80s was over.
Cher did one?
Yeah, famous one. Yeah, incredibly famous one, and that pops into my head. And it's funny that it does, because obviously the affiliation there is you touring with Cher.
That was a trip. I mean, that whole, the way that all came together was pretty crazy.
One of my favourite memories, and this is just a tiny small thing, but it's something that we would return to time and time again, is sitting down, and, you know, it would be late at night here, and it would be, I don't know what time for Jim, probably early hours of the morning, and you know, the scotch was flowing.
Sure.
And we would talk about film, and one of the things that Jim turned me on to, and you know, there's only so many hours in the day, and you can only watch so many movies and listen to so much music. One of the all-time classics that had always escaped me was Martin Scorsese's 1976 Taxi Driver with De Niro, and it's just one of those films I'd never got around to watching. And Jim was like, no, you really should watch it, it's incredible. his opinion would change depending on what day of the week you caught him on. But Taxi Driver was 9 times out of 10 his number one most favourite film of all time. On the rare occasion it wasn't, his other favourite film of all time would be Psycho, the original. But Taxi Driver, and my fondest memory is of us sitting back there talking about this film once I'd actually seen it, and discussing the incidental music, which is largely this kind of lulling, comforting, dreamlike jazz music. And it's mostly prevalent when the De Niro character is in the streets of New York driving the cab. And one of the discussions we got into was how that music evokes this vaguely high, cruising through life, going through the motions subtext without ever having to say that on screen.
Interesting. That's pretty deep.
And it's just the way that the music really adds to the narrative. And my memory's flagging on this because I haven't watched the film for a good few years now.
I can't even remember the last time I saw it. Now you're going to make me... now I'm going to have to watch it just...
Maybe we should both watch it and then come back here and discuss it sometime. That would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm up for it. Absolutely. So, but carry on. Go.
So, that's it. That's another... just a tiny little pocket of something that I remember fondly when I think of Jim.
Well, it's good to have, the memories. I mean, these are the moments you've lived through them. You've shared.
5 years we knew each other for. Obviously on separate sides of the world. Me in Scotland and him in Connecticut.
Losing him, it's a sad moment. Let's face it. I mean, it has the glass half full and the glass half empty.
I just think with death, you never know how it will affect you until it affects you. You never know when it's going to hit, and when it does, it's 9 times out of 10, it's still a surprise, even if you're expecting it.
Well, and it's sad because it definitely ends the life story. It ends at that moment. It closes the book, absolutely. The what ifs. What could it have gone this way, and why didn't I say this? Why didn't I do that?
That was almost a Meatloaf song.
Yeah, could very well go there.
There you go. The first podcast turned out to be a rather somber, funerary affair. To think that we are probably... we're going to have to, I don't know, poll that somehow. I've no idea. I don't even know what that means. But I would wager we're probably one of the very few people who have started off the first episode of a new podcast with a funeral.
Funeral for a friend.
Exactly. It's funny with you mentioning the audition for Dance of the Vampires, or Dance the Vampire. It reminded me of your first audition for Meatloaf, which was not exactly... how would you describe it? I mean, we can save this for a future episode, because I think we need a deep dive into 1993 as we'd originally planned.
Oh wait, I have one more Jim story that I need to share. Of course, the last time I saw him was at the Songwriters Hall of Fame when he was inducted there, and when I had left the band in 2006. And I remember getting an email from him that was, WTF is Marion Raven, and what is your cell phone number? Yeah. So he gave me his cell phone number. So I called him, and we spoke about that album. And we had I don't think I've ever spoken to him as much. I mean, we were on the phone. Put it this way, my cell phone battery died. And it was a very, very interesting conversation. I mean, I won't go into all the details of it. It was pretty intense. But it was just hysterical seeing this. And he used this huge font in the lettering. It was great. I mean, it's big, bold letters. WTF is Marion Raven. question mark, question mark. And what is your cell phone number? Mine is boom, 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 boom. And
so typically Jim.
That was a crazy conversation. From that, actually, I just remember this now. Yeah, we were talking about, because I was going to Nashville to do some writing. And he had introduced me to Steve Popovich. And when I got down to Nashville, I met with Steve. I had lunch with him and his son, and an interesting character called Cowboy Jack Clemens, which I didn't realize who he was in the music world. But I thought it was really nice of him to he's like, you should definitely hook up with Steve Popovich. So I thought that was very sweet. And I said, yeah, I'll bring him a jar of homemade tomato sauce. And I did. I brought Popovich. He's like, oh yeah, he'll totally love that. So it was very cute. There was yet another one of my Jim moments, my Jim stories and memories to share.
I think it's interesting that a lot of people probably don't realize all of the trials medically that Jim went through in those last 10 years. He never liked people talking about it, and I suppose that's something we can waver now. But Jim had, and even back to the point when I knew him, he'd had 9 strokes at that time. He'd suffered
God.
9, and
9.
Yeah, 9, and several times he lost the power to speak completely. And the thing that really got me about Jim was his personality, and the fact that he had such an amazing sense of humor about these awful, life-changing medical events. And he would just laugh and say, can you imagine, here I am, and at the time he was in his late 60s, having to learn the English language from scratch again, and the mechanics of how to enunciate.
Whoa.
Yeah, and he'd just laugh. He would just laugh at how ridiculous the whole thing was. And I know that had happened to him on more than one occasion, and in fact, once while I knew him, he'd woken up in the morning and had had a mini stroke, and the only thing that it had done, the only thing it had affected, was his power of speech again. And again, he had to go off and relearn speech.
Whoa.
Crazy.
Wow.
I know one of the things that affected him the most that wasn't funny was the aftermath of one of his earlier strokes. He'd lost the ability to play piano. And I think that affected him the most of all. That he couldn't compose anymore. And I know that he'd go on those various fan forums and be met with fans kind of still holding out for not a hero, but their hero to deliver more songs. And it was kind of, again, a chicken and the egg thing, you know. Jim never wanted to talk about it, so you couldn't inform those people of the situation, or they couldn't read the news anywhere. But at the same time, I know he always had that ticking around in the back of his mind, not only the fact that he couldn't compose, but that expectation at the same time. And I know that must have frustrated him greatly, and I don't mean I don't mean on the part of the unknowing fan. I just mean the whole situation must have frustrated him and affected him greatly. And something else medically that people perhaps don't know, and this is probably the biggest thing, is that in 2010 Jim had a massive heart attack, and he was told that he only had months to live because there was nothing they could do, and he went to the best cardiologists in the world. And it was only by chance that a young European doctor came across his file and recognized his name. And this doctor turned out to be a fan who had also gone to Amherst, just like Jim had, but at a much later time, and had gone there with the stories of Jim Steinman attending the same college and having performed and written The Dream Engine. And so he called him up and he was like, I'm so sorry to bother you. Are you the Jim Steinman who went to Amherst, who did The Dream Engine, who was responsible for Bat Out of Hell and all those great songs? And Jim was like, that's me. And he was like, look, I know what the doctors have told you, but trust me, I can do this surgery. And Jim did, and the way Jim described it to me, he made it sound both horrific and miraculous at the same time. It was full triple bypass surgery, but this doctor who Jim described as a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, European, square-jawed hunk, who reminded him of some Hitler Youth captain. This guy basically had Jim's heart in his hands, quite literally, and massaged it back to life. And Jim would always recount that part.
Oh.
In comparison to Battle of Hell, the song, and with the heart still beating. And Jim would always say, it's just like that moment in my song where the motorbike crashes and you've got the heart and it's still beating, breaking out of his body. He said that's the exact experience he went through. And luckily for him, that doctor came through and gave him at least another 10 years when he'd been told he would be facing just months.
It makes me, I'm just thinking now to myself, because you're saying he wasn't able to play or compose or physically play, but I wonder if he journalized or in some way was putting together the story or writing something, or was inspired to write something rather based on that experience. He had to have. What are the odds? What are the odds that this doctor was he? You said a European doctor, so he wasn't from the Americas. That happened to go to Amherst. Incredible, crazy story. Wow, but I didn't realize he had so many strokes. I didn't.
Yeah, and so if it weren't for that doctor, I never would have met Jim, and we never would have gone on the strange, weird, crazy, twisted journey that we eventually went on. And the world wouldn't have had the musical. Now here we are, and I think we've just come to the end of a first podcast. A somber first podcast. I'm going to try and punch the next one up. What do you think?
I think this was the right thing to do.
We're both feeling pretty morose at the minute, so you have a morose first podcast. Enjoy it in all of its morbidity.
We honor the music and the life of. There's no denying the influence that his music had on myself, on you.
I hope that it lives on, and I hope that via the musical it attracts a whole new audience of young listeners who perhaps will be discovering some of that music for the very first time.
They should have a course at Amherst, a musical theory course. They should. Well, on that note, the Kitchen Sink Chronicles. The dishes are out of the sink. They're all cleaned.
But who knows what's lurking in the pipes? Who knows what strange matter has been collected?
Oh God, it's so weird that you're saying that, because I had a major issue with that 2 weeks ago.
Well, I think that about wraps it up.
That's it.
This is us. Done.
That's it.
Over and out.
Ovaries and out. Yeah.
That's a nasty medical condition.
I coined that one a while back, and it's a funny one to me. And
well, let's leave people with this.
Yeah.
Let's leave people with this. Another line that you've coined frequently. Remember this as you go about your life. You hear things that perhaps you never would have heard anywhere else, and they don't always make sense at first, and then you hear something else, and maybe you'll come back to that memory and you'll say, okay, now I get it. It makes sense to me. And that line simply is this: you don't know what you don't know.
That's right. You don't know what you don't know. I've got to get these songs. I mean, I've got them sitting. The music to a few of them is finished. I just need to drag myself into a studio and get the proper vocals. I have super duper rough vocals that I just did.
For anyone who doesn't know, and this is going to be everyone because it's not public information, until now, Patti's been working on new material for an album for quite some time now. And I've been on the edge of my seat.
What's the never ending
story. I've been on the edge of my seat waiting for little nuggets of updates every time you call.
It's like the never-ending demo.
For some reason...
The never-ending demo. That's what I should call it.
Marl singing on your never-ending demo. If you remember that guy from the Never-Ending Story soundtrack in the 80s. You don't?
No, I
maybe,
don't.
Maybe it was more of a British thing than an American.
No. I'm going to have to... It's another movie I'm going to have to revisit. That's with the big giant dog that's flying through the clouds.
The Luck Dragon, yes.
Was the dog? But it's a dog, right? Or is it a dog dragon?
The clue
What?
was in the name. He's a luck dragon, but he does look a lot like a dog. Facially, he looks like a dog.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Of course, I got to remember that because it's it has to do with puppy dogs or kitty cats. So, okay.
So, new music coming from Patti Russo soon, and I don't think it's any kind of a spoiler, really, if I say there might be some kind of a concept attached to it. Lots of interesting projects coming up very soon. Sooner than we think.
I'm living it. I should turn it into a reality show.
Please don't do that.
No,
Don't debase yourself like that.
Do that.
Right, we've got to sign off because I know where this is going. Signing off until the next episode. Hopefully, we'll get it recorded faster than we recorded this episode. I think we'll be going back to 1993 in our time machine of memories, and we look forward to seeing you there. Take care, everybody, and goodbye.
Ovaries and out.